Welcome to today's Mad Scientist event, Generation Z in the Operational Environment, or for short, as we're calling it, Gen Z and the OE. This is a rare event, actually, in the world of TRADOC and FCC Features and Concept Center, because the age difference between the people that are here watching today and the people that are presenting is going to be a wide gulf. The average age in this room is definitely except unless you're in the basic training world, is definitely the youngest average age at Fort Eustis today as we go forward. So today's Gen Z and the OE event is actually just one in a series of events that Mad Scientist has been doing since November. First we had an event, Brains and Brews, that we did with the Defense Enterprise Forum, DEF, on the peninsula here to bring in young entrepreneurs and hear what they thought about the operational environment. And then we kicked off in January an operational environment survey, which is still open. If you haven't taken the survey, I'd encourage you to take it. Right now we have about 47 countries that have participated in that survey, and we're going to do some analysis on how different age groups, how people turn themselves, internationals versus U.S., what people think about the operational environment, what do they think the conflict drivers in the future security environment are. And as we do that analysis in partnership with in partnership with TRAC, as we go forward on that effort. On the 29th of January, we did an event with a series of NATO partners where they talked about the operational environment from their country's perspectives, and we ended with a NATO panel, and we looked at the NATO's perspective, and NATO's been undergoing a 2-week online exercise on the 2040 time period that came off of that panel, and that's been ongoing. And today we're here to spend time with some very bright Generation Z scholars and to them talk about their research as we go forward. So that's what we're doing. If you want to know more about Mad Scientists, I'd encourage you to go to the MadSci lab. We're streaming this event today, but make sure as you listen to these students, you're ready to ask them good questions because they're looking forward to answer those questions. Today's event and welcome remarks provided from Mr. Tom Greco, the Training Doctrine Command Senior Intelligence Officer, G2.
Thank you, Lee. So first off, I'd like to say thank you for joining us to Mr. Dave Brinkley, who's the Chief Personnel Officer, Human Resources Officer for Training and Doctrine Command. Also, Dr. Smith, I'd like to thank you for our neighbors at William & Mary for making yourselves available today. So let's talk a little bit about, just for a minute, let me talk a little bit about the Army, the Mad Scientist program, and why we asked you to do this. So the Army is, a little trivia, is the largest of all the services. We're all actually the senior service. We're actually older than the nation, having been founded in 1775. And if you study new nations, you'll often find that the first national level institution is often the Army. We saw that in places like the Balkans, we saw that in Iraq, in Afghanistan. Oftentimes, and we were no different, the first national level institution in rising democracies is often an Army. So what about Training and Doctrine Command? Well, first off, if you see guys and they have on their shirts or on their sleeves, they have an anvil, they're members of Army Futures Command. So they're our partners in the Mad Scientist program. So it's a joint Army Futures Command and Army Training and Doctrine Command. Army Futures Command designs the Army of the future. Army Training and Doctrine Command, as the name might imply, is responsible for training the Army that we have today and integrating new equipment and doctrine. So Training and Doctrine Command, we run schools at about 19 different installations. We teach everything from welding and truck driving to running small boats to graduate level degree programs. In fact, if you're a Marine and you know how to fire artillery or drive a tank, if you're a sailor, Coast Guardsman, or any service, and you know how to run a small boat, you'll probably learn that here. In fact, that about a half a million every year, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marine, and civilians. We also recruit the Army. Every year, the U.S. Army recruits the equivalent of more than the entire British Army. So think about that. It's a huge mission. And for those of you on William and Mary, as you've walked to Aromas, you've probably passed by the building which houses the ROTC detachment. ROTC is also a TRADOC program. Okay, so that's Training and Doctrine Command. Mad scientists. Okay, the name is kind of tongue-in-cheek, but the work is really serious. As a veteran, a lot of people will come up to me and say, thank you for your service. Well, and I appreciate that, but really if you want to be thankful, we really want you to help contribute. In fact, I came into the service after the Vietnam War, which I refer to as the Second American Civil War. We went after Vietnam while in Vietnam, we went from being a very respected, perhaps even necessary evil, to being abhorrent to a lot of the American population. Then after 9/11, we've become very highly regarded and very well respected. So that brings us here today. What we ask you when you say thank you for your service, Mad Scientist provides the on-ramp. That's what you're doing here today. We're giving you an on-ramp to share the intellect of the nation. How do we bring the intellect of the nation to bear on the Army's problems? So why did we ask a bunch of Gen Zers to come and talk to the Army? A little audience participation here. How many of you college students have actually had to help your parents program the remote or do something on their iPhone or do something with their computer, right? So we are what you'd call digital immigrants. We weren't born into a society where the internet was proliferated, certainly didn't have sophisticated smartphones. In fact, smartphones, 98% of Gen Zers, which are 7 to 22-year-olds, 98% of you actually have a smartphone. I'm not sure who that 2% is that doesn't have one. I'm not sure whether they're using flip phones or not phones, or they have something even cooler than a smartphone. And you spend about 10 hours a day looking at a screen. And in that 10 hours a day, you find that you get most of your information and you learn about products or new ideas through the social media which comes to you through the screen that you're looking at. So you are, just as those who are a little older than you were digital natives, Gen Zers are a little more circumspect about information. You've grown up your whole lives with an understanding that everything you see on that screen really may not be true. And you're a little bit more, you're empathetic, but you also spend a little bit more time looking to see what's authentic and what's genuine. So for those of us who need help programming the remote or using our iPhones, as a way of a metaphor, the reason we asked William and Mary in this excellent program, PIPS, to come talk to us is you are native to the circumspect desire for authenticity as we operate in an information environment where it's blurred the difference between a nation at war or a nation in competition or a nation at peace. It's very important for us to hear your voice. And after this is over, I have a couple of questions about my iPhone, which could really help if one of you guys would help me out with. Okay, so with that, thanks all the folks who've tuned in to the streaming video. We have a pretty good crowd here in the room. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tricia DeGennaro to lead the first panel.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Greco. I'm Tricia DeGennaro. I'm part of the TRADOC G2 here and an SME for all things political security, international security. So today, we're really excited about this panel. Today, our first panel is going to be on development and security implications of cutting-edge technologies, something we all need. more information on. And our panelists are Megan Hogan, Carolyn Duckworth, and Clara Waterman. And what I'm going to do is ask each one of you to introduce yourselves, and then you will have approximately 5 minutes or so to give your presentation. You can go first, Megan.
Right into the presentation?
No, just introduce yourself.
Sorry. My name is Megan Hogan. I'm a junior at the College of William & Mary. I'm studying international relations and economics, and my project is on the weaponization of deepfake technology.
Hi, my name is Clara Waterman. I'm a senior at the college. I'm a government major and an Arabic minor, and PIPS fellow this year, and my project is looking at the implications of how DoD treats data inputs that go on to program artificial intelligence.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm a junior at William & Mary. I'm studying international relations and minoring in data science. And my project is on the implications of different ethical standards when developing biotechnology.
Okay, so Megan, you go ahead. I'm interested and excited to hear about virtually undetectable deep fakes and the next generation of information warfare.
Deepfakes, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, it's a form of synthetic media that use artificial intelligence to produce highly realistic fake videos. So some of you may have seen the deepfake that was released by comedian Jordan Peele, in which he makes the former President Barack Obama appear to say obscenities about Donald Trump. Another famous deepfake is of Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, where in an interview he appears to brag about having total control of billions of people's stolen data. As those two examples suggest, deepfakes are extremely effective weapons of disinformation, and they're capable of both undermining trust in institutions and elections, and inciting political violence. While it has been possible to manipulate video footage for decades, such manipulation has almost always been detectable, time-consuming, and pretty expensive. The power and peril of deepfakes is that they lower the cost of disinformation. So where previously a high degree of technical expertise was needed to produce a realistic fake video of someone, today all you need is an internet connection. Deepfakes have a wide array of applications both on and off the battlefield. At the most basic level, a deepfake attack during wartime can cause momentary confusion within an adversary's political or military leadership. This confusion, in turn, can influence or stall adversary decision-making, providing American troops with a short window of time to either attack or escape, depending on the situation. Under coercive diplomacy strategy, which relies on the threat or limited use of military force to influence an adversary's decision-making, weaponized deepfakes could act as a more cost-effective, limited use of force. To intensify the pain of an offensive strategy, weaponized deepfake attacks can be deployed in conjunction with conventional military operations. Such a brute force application is particularly compelling because not only do deepfake attacks impede our adversary's ability to react, respond, and communicate, but they also allow us to shape the international narrative of a military operation in the critical early days of a conflict. Deepfakes can also be used to weaken existing domestic support for ruling parties, acting as propaganda in a broader US-led disinformation campaign. But most importantly, weaponized deepfakes can be used to strengthen and refine existing deepfake detection algorithms. By the end of 2020, virtually undetectable deepfakes will be a reality. The United States therefore faces a choice. The Department of Defense can either continue to restrict its research to developing video authentication algorithms or expand its effort to include weaponization for coercive diplomacy and warfighting. Each option is associated with a series of benefits and costs. From an offensive standpoint, deepfakes are a powerful tactic to incorporate into our arsenal. They're difficult to defend against, they're cheap, fast-acting, and have no clear escalation thresholds. From a defensive standpoint, weaponizing deepfakes will enhance our current detection capabilities by improving our understanding of how these weapons are made. This being said, there's always a serious risk that American deepfake attacks will leak out of their targeted audience and go viral on social media platforms, given social media's growing significance as a relatively unfiltered peer-to-peer communication network and news source. Going viral increases the risk that a leaked deepfake attack will be attributed to the United States, and attribution, in turn, makes it exceedingly difficult for the US to verify any video it produces as legitimate. Every deepfake attack has the potential for backfire, but in many cases, the benefits actually outweigh the costs. Think, for example, of a military deception, like a modern-day Operation Bodyguard. The US can produce a deepfake of a regional ISIS leader calling for an attack on a fake US convoy. As the fighters close in on the fake base, we can then ambush them. Ultimately, I argue that the United States should develop weaponized deepfake technology as a capability to deter, deny, or defeat any adversary that seeks to harm US national interests, even if this capability is never used.
Wow, thank you very much. That's quite sobering. Put on my mic here. Very sobering. As a member of the network engagement team here, several of the things we're looking at is in the operating environment is disinformation. One of the other things we are looking at as well is data sets and the quality of those data sets in order to look at our networks objectively. So, Clara, can you tell us a little bit about what your project was? Thank you.
Absolutely, that was a beautiful segue. So the U.S. Department of Defense is spending billions of dollars on artificial intelligence research and development with the ultimate goal of integrating AI into its tactical and operational decisions, as well as technologies such as autonomous weaponry. For the purposes of this paper, AI is a series of predictive models that are trained on a specific data set to provide forecasts and estimations about a particular subject. Currently, the DoD is not adequately equipped to deal with the data that underpins AI algorithms. AI without data is like a car without gas. The framework for movement can exist, but it is incapable of going anywhere without the proper inputs. DoD data practices rest on 3 pillars: collection, vetting, and labeling. First, the DoD collects millions of terabytes of data every day from its own internal sensors and through external providers. Because of the staggering amount of data that it has to sort through, only about 5% of this data actually gets to the DoD analysts who need it. A lack of communication between offices and departments also leads to high levels of redundancy in data collection, costing the DoD thousands of man-hours and millions of dollars. Second, the DoD inconsistently vets its data. While there is no strong focus for securing the While there is a strong focus on securing the hardware in which data is stored, there is no streamlined process for determining the veracity of the data that is collected. When there is an effort to vet data, the process can become so expensive, the data projects are often sidelined or abandoned entirely. Third, because of its tedious and labor-intensive nature, data labeling is often conducted by untrained DoD employees, or, in some cases, by gig economy workers for as little as $1 an hour. As a result, data sets are rarely accompanied by a pedigree that indicates the curator's methods of collection and confidence in the quality of the data. Further, due to the high quality of specialized DoD storage formats, the data sets are rarely interoperable. The DoD already has AI elements in its mission support and enterprise functions, but its goal is to integrate AI into its operational tasks to supplement battlespace navigation, risk management, and decision-making. If the data that feeds operational AI is insufficient or inaccurate, the military leaders will misunderstand the operating environment, leading to misinformed decision-making and security breaches. These problems are further exacerbated by bias in training, input, and feedback data, all of which create blind spots and perpetuate the inaccuracies in a continuous data cycle. Given the many challenges the DoD faces when it comes to the data that drives AI development, it is clear that collaboration is key. The DoD's ability to maintain the strategic advantage over its adversaries hinges on its data synchronization efforts to counter bias, blind spots, and loss of control. To counter these challenges, I propose the creation of a data clearinghouse that facilitates communication about data collection, vetting, and labeling between offices, departments, and agencies. Groups could fill out a simple data pedigree form that accompanies their data sets and submit data profiles to the clearinghouse so that others with clearances and a need to know can search for data sets and contact their owners. For security and financial purposes, the data clearinghouse would not be a central bank for all DoD data. Rather, it would act as a standardized liaison between groups to increase communication and streamline data efforts. This clearinghouse would be maintained by data scientists and analysts who would serve as something like research librarians with up-to-date knowledge on what data sets exist on a given topic, the quality of those data sets, and the pertinent information from the originator. The DoD, as a powerful purchasing and regulatory body, has the unique capability and responsibility to create and enforce data standards throughout the public and private sectors. The sooner that the DoD can capitalize on this opportunity, the faster it will be able to achieve its AI goals, as high-quality data sets are crucial to the DoD mission.
I just have to say that not only is everyone here probably smarter than all of us, but they are right on with their 5 minutes. So that's excellent. Okay, and finally we have Carolyn Duckworth. Carolyn's going to talk to us a little bit about the development in biotechnology. One of the terms she uses is asymmetric ethics. And I'm excited to hear more about that in her presentation.
Thank you. In November 2018, the first babies with genetically altered genomes were born. And this generated a heated international debate over the accomplishment. And at the core of this debate were the ethics associated with the technology. What I've found is that in cases like this, the United States is at a strategic disadvantage in biotechnology development due to its rigid ethical standards. It's likely that other countries will start to recognize this and move to exploit the existing gap. As you're aware, ethics in research and development reflect a society's values. This leads to different ethical standards and practices in different countries. So, for instance, in the United States, we have extensive public debate surrounding ethical, medical, and biotechnology practices. And a large part of this is as a result from previous failures and efforts to address them. For instance, you could think of the Tuskegee experiment. This discussion significantly contrasts with a case like China, where a collectivist culture is more tolerant of individual sacrifice to benefit public progress. These differences in ethics already shape international biomedicine. Treatments and research involving embryonic stem cells are severely limited in the United States, but in China, the use of embryonic stem cells isn't inhibited by its religion or culture, allowing them to more rapidly develop these treatments. Another example involves the development of pharmaceuticals. The majority of new medicines being developed are tested abroad. In part, this is due to avoid expensive domestic red tape. The effects of these asymmetric ethics will expand well beyond these two examples as biotechnology innovation accelerates. Already, we can see that the United States' peer competitors are investing in these dual-use technologies, and in some cases, they're even collaborating. For instance, in 2018, Russia and China worked together to fund the largest biotechnology lab in Russia. This framework presents two possible risks to the United States. First, countries like China could increase U.S. dependency on foreign bioproducts. China already dominates the export of generic prescription medication, but recent policy demonstrates that China is pivoting to promote the development of innovative biopharmaceuticals. This could allow China to create a chokehold on essential medicine, threatening a critical U.S. supply chain. Policies like the 13th Five-Year Plan and Made in China 2025 make it clear that biohegemony is a Chinese goal. So this weaponized dependency could even expand to other fields like synthetic biology treatments. Second, states with tolerant ethical standards in biotech will also be able to more rapidly pursue and adopt controversial military technologies. These technologies fall under two broad categories: bioweapons and human enhancement. Cheap gene editing tools like CRISPR allow for the development of low-cost, precise bioweapons, and these include those that target specific individuals or populations based on their genetic codes. Countries with more flexible bioethical standards may be more likely to develop and to use these technologies. In human enhancement tech, biotechnology innovators hope to provide soldiers with advantages ranging from disease resistance to enhanced cognition. And while we may have many volunteers who are interested in becoming enhanced, our safety protocols and ethical requirements for testing may slow implementation compared to other militaries. The timeline of all of these threats vary significantly, but addressing them will require dedicated effort over time. I argue that this can be addressed using a three-step approach. First, the United States should formalize its guiding principles in biotechnology development. This solution would involve a process similar to what the DoD already developed for AI ethics when it tasked the Defense Innovation Board to meet with experts, academics, ethicists, and lawyers to create guiding ethical principles for AI. Broadcasting these principles will allow the United States to serve as a model for others and allow us to condemn violations consistently. Second, the United States should expand on the US-China program for biomedical collaborative research. This program is run by the NIH and would effectively allow the United States to hold international researchers to US bioethical standards. This expansion should also include targeted ethics training for scientists. Long-term, this collaboration would influence ethical norms, and this strategy already has the support of biotech industry leaders who are concerned that the current prosecution of Chinese scientists deters innovation and generally harms the national interest. Finally, DARPA should develop a task force to identify specific biotechnologies where the United States will lag in implementation due to its ethical standards. Then, the DoD can strategically invest in competing but also ethical technologies. By increasing investment in ethical development and promoting a global consensus on bioethical standards, the United States can maintain its advantage in biotech.
Very good. I think Army Futures Command just got part of its new marching orders for what it should be focusing on. So within the, I'll get started on a question or so, and then let's open it up to the audience. There are three things that I heard quite a bit within the topics of these presentations, and I mean the topics are absolutely a lot of the things that we are looking at in how to train the future military, specifically in areas like disinformation, good data, and I just love asymmetric ethics, which is very good. So I'm hearing trust, ethics, and truth in a lot of the issues that we're having here. And within that context, I think we have to think really hard. It makes me think whether we should use our power for good or otherwise. So it sounds to me like I'd like to ask you a little bit about that. So in context to deep fakes, basically, how or what should we be investing in not only to identify them, but do you all think we should also be investing in using them? You mentioned a deep fake weapon.
Oh, yes. So yes, at its core, my paper is an attempt to answer whether the United States should continue what it's doing, because we are developing deepfakes currently. It's not weaponized, but we are developing them through DARPA's Metaphor Task Force. Basically, my stance when it comes to deepfakes is I believe we should be developing deepfakes for two reasons. First, in that they're really effective weapons, specifically for covert operations. And secondly, because they will help us, I believe they will really help us to enhance our current detection mechanisms already. So I want to briefly explain how deepfakes are in fact detected, because it's a little more complicated than people might first think it to be. Deepfake detections, deepfakes are like viruses, let me just put it briefly like that, right? They're constantly evolving. And as is the case with scientists who attempt to create a vaccine for a virus, deepfake detection teams are constantly playing catch up, right, with mutations of deepfakes, namely more sophisticated deepfakes that have patched up any telltale signs of forgery. We are always going to be scientists playing this game of catch-up because the way deepfakes are built, they are constantly replicating the appearance of reality. I don't believe that we should ever stop attempting to detect deepfakes. I really do believe that they will be used against us in some capacity in the future. However, we aren't weaponizing them, and I think with detection specifically, weaponizing will help us to better understand how to defend against this technology in general.
Great, thanks. So, Claire, I'd like to ask you about high-quality data sets. We have a lot of data out there, large amounts. It's very hard to organize. It's very hard to decide which is the best information that you should be using in order to make an analysis. So can you tell us a little bit more about not only collecting the data, but ensuring that it is that high quality?
Absolutely, and I think my paper gets a little bit into this too. When it is done, I'd be happy to pass it along. But I look at some examples in the intelligence community specifically to talk about what's the danger of not just collecting data, but not vetting it properly and making sure it's representing reality in an authentic way, primarily through the agent curveball in 2003, and then the U.S. bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 2001. So to talk about data quality, you really can't start without talking about its accompanying information. We keep seeing again and again how one office will create a data set and spend all this time, vetting it and making this really clean, pretty thing, and then it will be sent to someone else who has no context on what categories were considered and basically like how the data was created, what was left out, what was included, what wasn't, who they talked to, who they didn't, just the processes behind it. And so that's what I'm hoping that my policy solution would help to fix. I have a template for a data pedigree that basically asks a series of about 10 questions that gives people context. So there's some continuity between offices and data collection proceedings. And I hope that through using that, we will decrease redundancy, increase communication and collaboration on data collection.
Great, thank you. We're looking forward to reading that paper. I think we could use a little help on how we think about it now in some of the work we're doing. Okay, so one last question for Caroline, and then I'm going to open it up to everyone else. Caroline, you talk about the ethics of medicine and some of the constraints we have here in the United States about the experimentation we are doing. We've come to this point because of past histories and past experiences that we've had in these areas. Do you see ways where we can be more responsible in doing this, as well as moving forward in being able to identify and compete with others in this area?
So I definitely want to emphasize that I think that our ethical standards can certainly be a strength. It is very good to maintain the safety of your patients, to maintain the high quality of your products that you're producing. But I think that in some terms, it has become a bit political. So when you're looking at things like the embryonic stem cell research, which hinders progress based on presidential administration and the funding that's available, I think those are cases where we can be held back, and it's not even necessarily a question of responsibility. It's just a question of differing opinions on what our standards should be. So I think in those cases, it is essential to recognize that those are areas where we're going to be held back, and then we can identify things that maybe would work differently for us, but would still fall under that framework that we could push to develop.
Okay, excellent. So let's open it up. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we have two questions from the chat roll. The first question for Megan is, it seems the U.S. is always playing catch-up with information warfare and is still in some ways. How will our efforts compare to peer competitors and non-state actors? Will we be able to advance more rapidly compared to our adversaries?
It's a good question. In terms of detection capabilities, I believe that this is coming from what I've gathered in my research. I obviously do not hold the top secret security clearance. I don't know. In short, I don't know. But from what I have gathered, in terms of where the U.S. is with deepfake detection, if there ever is a cutting edge of it, we will certainly be on it. DARPA's Metaphor team has made outstanding progress in terms of deepfakes with face swaps, audio deepfakes, like a whole spectrum of them. However, I'm in a weird position with my paper because while I am obviously very proud of where the United States is, I believe we can still do better, and I believe a way to get there is through weaponization to enhance our detection capabilities.
Thank you. The second question is for Carolyn. Just scrolled, I'm sorry. It would seem that genetic modification is inevitable. What practical measures would you recommend to roll back any modifications that prove harmful to society rather than the individual?
So I think something that's really interesting about the evolution of gene editing technology is how it's really become very available to people who are not necessarily experienced in biological training. You know, you can order a CRISPR kit on the internet and have it delivered straight to your house. And then you can be experimenting with perhaps even some people are trying to augment themselves with these technologies. So I think that's going to be a big question moving forward, is how to deal with the really the democratization of these biotechnologies. And that generally falls outside the scope of my research, but I think it's a very important question that we should be looking into, because it is going to be difficult to regulate, because at this point it's out there.
Okay, ladies, I think you did a great job. And just so everybody knows, we have about 20 more minutes for questions. So make sure you bring your questions forward. So I'll make a comment, and then I have a question for you. I really believe, actually, the three of y'all, your topics, you even have a bigger idea here. So Mad Scientists, we're going to do a conference this summer on weaponized information. So for example, deepfakes is ground zero, but what's next is voice cloning. What's next? There's a whole series of additional things, artificial people, artificial influencers, and deepfakes is at the groundswell of all of that. Security, your three ideas are right on, but I think that there's a fourth one, which is security of data on the data, because the idea of manipulation of data and spoofing of that data goes to building the fake reality that our adversaries are going to try to bring against us. So it's the deep fakes, it's the manipulation of our data that we take as true. So I think your three ideas, I think there's a security piece there. And the Chinese, the reason why they're so interested in the cognitive science part of the biotechnology piece is because in reality, the two things you're trying to do is affect what's between my ears. The three of you, what you're talking about is effectively what our adversaries are trying to do is weaponize all these pieces together. And I think that's very interesting. I think that as you have your Friday meetings and whatever, just maybe something you ought to further explore. So, I mean, have you thought about that? I know how you work. Y'all get together and you brainstorm. Have you made the connections between your topics, or have you just listened to each other? Have you done that? I just offered to the group.
So we've definitely realized that there's a lot of overlap and a lot of projects feeding into each other this year, especially when we talk about authoritarianism, and which is the topic of several presentations in the next panel. Like data and AI is obviously right up there. And so I think we're talking about kind of the common themes, but I haven't, I guess, really thought about the ways that we can capitalize on that to kind of target one thing. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. But yeah, we've definitely noticed that when we all came to the table, we were like, okay, we have the relevance of truth and how that's being eroded and how we want to tackle it in our different ways.
Right. So our adversary, one of our potential adversaries, China, are collecting a lot of facial activity
Yeah.
for deep fakes. They're building the data to do that, and basically are getting hold of everybody's DNA they can get a hold of.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a direct connection between these three ideas that you're talking about. So each one of them in itself is very scary. All three of them together, we're not currently addressing this in the Army's concept of the future. So,
Yeah, those
so
are the three
take-
things, yeah, I brought up too, trust, ethics, and truth, and it all does have to do with the cognitive, which is something we're working on here at TRADOC and hope to give to the Futures Command.
Good afternoon. Speaking of the Futures Command, Major Jonathan Shloka, Futures Concept Center, Army Futures Command. Two-part question. The first part is, are the problems discussed today equally applicable to all countries, or do they inherently mostly apply to the U.S. or any other specific country? And how do you believe this will change over time? That's the first portion. And then kind of what Mr. Greco was alluding to, based on generational differences, when do you think the culture of data usage and deep fakes will enable efficient and effective use?
So in regards to the first part of your question, when you're talking about whether or not this is a problem mostly for the U.S. or for other countries in general, I would say in terms of my project on the asymmetric ethics of biotechnology, I think that is something that could definitely apply, not just to the United States. Something that I was looking at too is, as I said, a lot of our pharmaceuticals are tested abroad, and that's true for a lot of European developed pharmaceuticals as well. And so I think that this actually could be an opportunity to collaborate with allies in terms of addressing the potential that will be held back in those areas. So I would say that, at least in terms of my project, it's definitely not just a U.S. problem.
I would echo that. This is something that our alleged adversaries, I like that term, Russia and China in particular are making great strides in terms of synchronizing their data collection efforts, in labeling and vetting, consolidating it so it's all in one place. And that, I think, poses a significant risk to the U.S. because the more coordinated our adversaries become, the more agile they are in a battle environment, in our operating environment. And yeah, that's definitely not unique to the United States, but I will say that we're behind based on my research.
In terms of deepfakes, the United States is not the only country that is developing deepfakes. It's pretty obvious that some of our other allies and our adversaries are in fact developing them. In terms of where we are with detection, again, the United States, if there is a cutting edge of deepfake technology, because again, we're always playing catch up, but we're at the frontier of this. We are as cutting edge as we can be. But in terms of other countries deploying deepfakes against us as a weapon, given our high rates of detection, we will very likely be able to detect a deepfake if it comes from a non-state actor and if it comes from one of our adversaries. However, that might not necessarily matter because when a deepfake goes out, given selection bias and confirmation bias that is just inherent in human beings themselves, we tend to believe what we see, and we tend to believe things that confirm previous held notions that we have. So the danger with deepfakes, generally, even if we can debunk something and say, this is a fake video, this was made by this non-state actor in this group, it might not matter because it's still out there. In terms of how long deepfakes will play a role, I can foresee this technology being very impactful in at least the next 10 years, that deepfakes will consistently play a role. Until there is an independent agency or some type of verification mechanism that can consistently say whether a video is real or not, I say deepfakes are always fair game, and they will always be able to influence people's perceptions, their actions, politics, etc. Hope that answered your question.
Good afternoon. Major Ryan Collins, Futures and Concept Center. If we were to use a deepfake offensive weapon, say against a legitimate target, I'm curious what your thoughts are on how that might rebound on a U.S. polity, just a domestic audience.
The problem with deepfakes is there's always a chance, as I said previously, there's always going to be a chance that a deepfake attack will go viral on social media. And in terms of it going viral, it will come back to US audiences. The US needs to be able to prepare for any type of blowback. My paper is just trying to be a cost-benefit analysis. I'm trying to take a more 1,000-foot up view and just be like, hey, these are the benefits and costs of using this technology. I'm not trying to make a moral argument on it. But that being said, there are always special precautions that the United States can take when it is deploying a deepfake attack to minimize the risk of a deepfake going viral. But again, this risk will never disappear. I would just want to make that very clear. There's always a chance. Social media is everywhere. Everything can be seen online these days. But the US can throttle internet connections to slow down the chance that a deepfake will be uploaded to Twitter or Facebook. We can harden targets within a country before we launch a deepfake, that kind of thing. But yeah, the risk will always be there, unfortunately.
Yes, you do.
Okay. Hey, so I actually have two questions. Ms. Duckworth, you made an interesting point. Actually, you all made very interesting points. But one of your points was developing a collaboration with China so that we could develop a universal ethics. I would ask each of you, as you think about your primary theses, we talk a lot about the threats. Could you give me examples of positive opportunities that your research could lead us to?
So just to touch on the collaboration piece, because that is one of my proposed policy solutions, I want to also make it clear that this isn't something I'm proposing creating. It actually already exists. It's run by the NIH. And I think one of the problems that at least it's been brought to the forefront by leaders in private sector biotechnology research is that currently there's a lot of prosecution of Chinese scientists over concerns about IP theft and all of these things, which are absolutely legitimate, valid concerns that should be continually addressed. But I think that this is an opportunity for collaboration. You know, when you're trying to establish these global norms about what's acceptable with biotech, I think it's essential to have everyone on the playing field with you. And so I think that that's an important piece of my policy solution.
I love this question because I feel like these presentations can feel a little doom and gloom. So yeah, let's focus on the positive. For my policy solution in my field, I'm looking honestly to save us money and man hours. We have way too much data and way too few people to go through it. And if there's any way that we can standardize and streamline efforts, then that is mission critical in my opinion. And the benefits of having the streamlined data is not just to say, check, we don't have to do as many data sets or clean as many or whatever. It's more to further advance our AI integration into all of our technologies, as you all probably know, the DoD has really grand ambitions for artificial intelligence and has a lot of very, very cool and scary things that they can do with it. Unfortunately, a lot of it is at risk of being like hacked or at risk of being exposed if the data that underpins it is just not there. So for both our security and for our ability to create these data collection standards in the future, I think we have to start thinking about how we're going to consolidate these data efforts so that we can advance AI within the DoE.
So it might sound a little counterintuitive to say weaponizing will help us better pursue truth, like weaponizing information will help us better pursue truth. But I believe that it actually is a good solution. Some of our allies within NATO actually are, they've come out and said that they are going to engage in information operations moving forward, and they're trying to start developing weaponized deepfakes and bots and the like. But if together we are all weaponizing and we are further enhancing our detection capabilities, together we can pursue truth and together we can prevent the erosion of democracy, which is what a lot of doom and gloomers talk about when they think about deep fakes and how you can't believe anything that you see anymore. So again, collaboration together to solve the issue of deep fakes, I think, is a good solution.
That's a great segue to my second question. First, the first part, we actually have a couple of our allied foreign liaison officers, one from Denmark and the other from Israel, and they're not timid, so you may get a question from them. But the second part kind of goes back to the last point you made. When our allies look at Americans, they often refer to us as being inflexible, kind of rigid, structured thinkers. But you just raised a really interesting point. What's the potential in each of your theses for self-policing as opposed to setting up clearinghouses, having an authority? With the flow of information enabled by technology allows for great democratization, right? So what's the potential? How do we take advantage of the strength of democratization and the flow of information to establish within your fields, within your theses, self-policing frameworks, if you will?
Thank you for your question. So I would argue that the overall goal of the DoD is to become or continue being like a really dexterous body that can turn on a dime and really address the current issues and perceive the future ones. And while I think self-policing is absolutely possible within the data collection, labeling, and vetting sphere, that's something that it just currently isn't being done. There's a capacity to do it, but there just physically isn't the manpower to coordinate and to be able to catch up with these trillions of bytes of data that are being collected every day. So because of also some of the more stovepipe nature of certain offices and groups within the DoD, it makes communication very difficult. And self-policing is only as good as the data that you have and what you're trying to do. So I do think that collaboration and potentially like an overseeing body, while not to weigh this whole process down with more bureaucracy, would actually help like expedite these like data efforts and data proceedings and make sure that that we are spending our time and energy on the tasks that are really before the DoD and not getting bogged down in the little semantics of data.
In terms of self-policing with truth and specifically video truth with deepfakes, there's a lot of talk when people think about deepfakes and get freaked out about deepfakes in terms of what they can do to democracies and can do to information flows. There's a desire also within the DoD for a super algorithm that can consistently detect deepfakes and will continue to do so throughout time for all videos. As I briefly explained with how deepfakes are detected, personally I don't think that that's very realistic, but that doesn't mean it's not worth trying. So with self-policing, of information and what information is coming onto American social media platforms. Many of you might have seen Facebook actually said that it's going to take a stance against deepfakes, involving big tech with information flows and disinformation. That is one possible route that the United States can take. But consistently working towards developing better detection algorithms, I think, is really the best way to combat deepfake attacks.
So self-policing is really interesting in the terms of my project because at a government scale, it's very easy to say that, the United States almost over self-polices in terms of like what funding is available for what type of research based on someone's specific opinion on what's morally acceptable to do in biotech. But as you mentioned, and as I briefly stated before in the question I got from the online platform, was that these technologies are becoming more and more accessible to everyday people. You can order them online, as I said. So we're always going to have the opportunity for these rogue scientists to be developing as well. In the case of the recent births of the CRISPR babies, some would say that he's a rogue scientist. Some would say that they knew all along that he was going to do that. But we're always going to be running into those problems, and so I think that it's very interesting to think about how we're self-policing at a government level versus at like, individual people who are able to have access to this just through an internet connection.
Okay, I think this is mainly for Caroline. Your point about asymmetric ethics, I think, was really well made. And I'm curious if you see any sort of bioethics from the United States perspective that would be inviolable. And if there were, is it likely that our adversaries would use those sorts of inviolable ethics as a point of exploitation in order to develop this, again, another asymmetric approach?
Thank you for your question. So I think you're absolutely right that this is, there are going to be problems that we're going to run into in terms of lines that we're not going to want to cross. And I think we kind of ran into that a little bit with the birth of the babies who had their germlines edited. And in that case, there was an international outcry, and they immediately said, oh, we had no idea, China had no idea that this was happening, which is several papers would beg to differ. But I think that in terms of biotech, it's advancing so rapidly that the technology that we're potentially talking about might not even exist yet. And so I think that we're going to find a lot of red lines that we're not going to want to cross, and that's why we should start developing these kind of global consensus. We should start that now.
Okay, I'd like to thank everybody and thank the William and Mary students for coming out and sharing their papers and thesis with us. They're excellent, and I'm looking forward to the next panel. They're all things we're going to need to think about now and in the near future. Thank you.
Okay, ladies, stay where you are.
Wow, so you certainly proved in spades what I said about being so much more comfortable in this idea space than those of us who are, I would say, more experienced. Okay, old. So a lot of folks will say, so, hey, this mad scientist program is really cool. How do I become a mad scientist? Well, you don't become a mad scientist. You actually have to be proclaimed. So we're going to proclaim you as Army Mad Scientists, and we're only going to read this once. We're going to proclaim each of you. We'll only read it once, and after we read it the first time, you'll know why we only read it once. So Lee?
Proclamation, United States Army Mad Scientist. Whereas the Mad Scientist Initiative encourages continuous dialogue and collaboration among academia, industry, government, and non-traditional partners. And whereas the Mad Scientist Initiative identifies tomorrow's key innovations today so the U.S. Army is successful in the future operational environment. And whereas the Mad Scientist Initiative supports Army learning and capability development, and whereas, fill your name in this case, Megan Hogan, provided great and valuable insights and contributions to furthering the mission goals and understanding of the Mad Scientist Initiative. Now, therefore, by the virtue of the authority vested in us as the Deputy Director of Futures and Concept Center, Army Futures Command, and the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, Deputy Chief of Staff Intelligence, we do hereby proclaim that, fill your name in, be known henceforth and forevermore as an official mad scientist with all the rights and privileges pertaining thereto. May you always seek the future boldly, actively question conventional wisdom and assumptions, and passionately challenge the status quo. Signed this day, the 28th of February, Miles Brown, Deputy Director, Features and Concept Center, and Thomas Greco, TRADOC Deputy Chief of Staff, G2.
So the reason we know this is kind of a big deal is when folks like Pete Singer put on his official biography that he is a proclaimed Army mad scientist, and when other folks like the former Secretary of Defense and others actually take their certificate and post it on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, we knew that these proclamations were going to be kind of a big deal. So thank you all very much.